He rejected every woman. Then a Zulu widow asked, "You want a wife, or just shelter?" The cold held the camp before dawn. Smoke barely rose through the black pines, and the men coughed in their blankets before the cook bell. It was the kind of cold that bit the teeth and left the breath hanging between faces like threadbare ghosts. He woke as he always did, before the others, before the thaw of fire, and sat at the edge of his bunk, rubbing his hands hard together until they stung. Elias Hart was not a young man anymore, 38, though the forest had taken 10 more from his shoulders and eyes. His beard was the same grey-brown as the bark he worked against, and his palms were ridged with scars that caught splinters like hooks. He had worked north for 15 years, through 3 provinces and 2 wars, and every season he told himself it would be his last. But the work always called him back, same as the hunger, same as the silence that only the north could keep. The bunkhouse smelled of pitch and wool. Boots lined the walls like soldiers waiting inspection. Somewhere a man swore in French and struck a match, lighting a small flame that showed the frost smoke drifting from every mouth. Outside, the trees stood tall and patient, their tops glowing faintly under a sky just beginning to pale. Elias stepped outside into the cold, his boots crunching through hard snow. He didn't look toward the horizon. He never did. The horizon promised too much. He only looked at the trees ahead, the frozen river below, and the mule lines tethered near the sheds. He checked the axes laid out on the sled. 4 handles cracked, 1 new head fitted last night by lamplight. The steel caught the dawn like thin water. He worked silently as the camp stirred awake. The cook's bell rang, iron against iron, and the smell of beans and salt pork cut through the air. Men shuffled out, muttering, stamping their boots, wrapping scarves around faces raw from wind. Elias joined them, nodding to no one. He didn't have friends in camp. Not anymore. Once he did, before too many faces changed, before too many names were lost to the saws or the river ice. Now he kept to himself, steady as the frost line, and the others respected him for it. "Morning? Hart," said a young Quebecois called Remy. The boy's breath came out in thick bursts, his eyes red from drink. "You hear there's a new supply wagon coming up from the south. Might be fresh tobacco in it," Elias shrugged. "If the road's clear," he said. "That road's never clear. Still," Remy grinned, teeth flashing. "Man can hope." "Hope's for men without axes," Elias replied, not unkindly, and pushed past him toward the sled. By mid-morning, the sun had cleared the line of black spruce. The team moved upriver, where the timber marked for cutting leaned heavy under snow. The air rang with the dull thud of iron-biting wood. Chips flew, sharp as frost, settling on shoulders and sleeves. Each strike carried its own rhythm, one for anger, one for hunger, one for the dull ache of duty. Elias swung his axe with no rhythm at all, just the steady patience of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. The sound of it was clean. The foreman rode up the line on a bay horse, checking progress. "Hart," he called, "we'll need you down at the ferry by dusk. Wagons coming in with supplies. And someone else, too. Some trader's widow from the south looking for work or shelter. You're to see her settled." Elias looked up. His breath hung like smoke between them. "Why me?" "Because you don't talk much, and the rest of these bastards talk too damn much," said the foreman, spitting into the snow. "Get the logs moved by noon, then head down river." The horse turned, hooves cracking ice as it went. Elias stood a moment longer, axe buried halfway through a trunk, the sound of the foreman's words still ringing in his mind. A widow from the south. He had seen too many wanderers lately. Men, women, even children, all drifting north from burnt farms and broken contracts. They came chasing shelter, not salvation. But the idea of a widow, of anyone new, unsettled him more than he'd admit. By dusk, he reached the ferry landing. The river was half frozen, black ice laced with white, and the ferry itself creaked under the weight of 1 wagon and 2 horses. A driver stood beside it, stamping his feet, and beside him, wrapped in a heavy brown shawl, was a woman. She didn't move much, only watched the water, her eyes unreadable against the fading light. "You Elias Hart?" called the driver. "Foreman said you'd meet us." Elias nodded. "That's right. This here's Mrs. Ndlovu," the man said, hitching a thumb toward her. "Husband was a trader out of Montreal. Died of fever last winter. She's looking for a place to work, maybe cookhouse or laundry. Foreman said you had a spare bunk near your shed." Elias said nothing for a long time. The wind lifted the edge of the woman's shawl, revealing skin the color of dark riverstone, cheekbones cut sharp by cold, and eyes that watched him with quiet steadiness. She looked neither frightened nor grateful, just present, as though she'd already seen too much to be surprised by a man like him. He cleared his throat. "There's a spare bunk. It's cold. You sure you want it?" "I want what keeps me alive," she said softly. He nodded once. "Then you'll have it." The driver helped her down, handed off a small trunk, and climbed back to his wagon. The ferry rope groaned as he turned back south, leaving the two of them standing in the dim blue light beside the river. Elias lifted the trunk onto his sled. "Camp's a mile north," he said. "Snow's hard. Walk close." They walked without speaking. The forest swallowed their sound. Only the sled runners whispering over crusted snow. She walked steady, not slowing, though her boots weren't made for ice. Once, she stumbled on a root hidden beneath the drift, and his hand went out instinctively. Her arm was firm under the wool. She righted herself before he could pull, then nodded once in thanks. They didn't speak again. By the time the camp lights showed between the trees, night had come hard. Smoke rose in thin ribbons from chimneys. Dogs barked near the cookhouse. Elias led her to his shed, a small structure near the tool racks, half workshop, half sleeping space. Inside, the air smelled of pine tar and old leather. A single cot sat near the stove, and another bunk, unused, against the far wall. He set her trunk beside it. "It's not much," he said, "but it's warm when the fire holds." She looked around, her eyes tracing the shelves lined with oil tins and rope coils. "Warm is enough. I'll tell the foreman you're settled. Supper's at the mess if you want it." She turned to him then, pulling the shawl tighter. "And you?" "You always sleep alone." He paused by the door. "Always." Her eyes lingered on him, not quite curious, not quite cold. "Then you must know the price of it." He didn't answer. The wind pressed against the door. Somewhere outside, a saw shrieked once before silence. He left her there, the glow of the stove painting her shadow long against the boards. Later that night, he lay awake on his cot, staring at the low ceiling. He could hear the faint shift of her weight across the room, the creak of her bunk, the slow rhythm of her breath. It had been years since another human sound had shared his walls. The strangeness of it worked through him like heat. Uncomfortable. Alive. In the darkness, she spoke. "You built this place yourself?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Since the last man died here," he said quietly. A pause. "Then you built it on loss." He exhaled slowly. "Everything here is built on loss." Silence again. The fire cracked. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and endless. When he woke, she was already up, stoking the stove with one hand, the other wrapped in a piece of cloth against the cold. She had boiled water, laid out tin cups, and mended a glove he hadn't touched in weeks. The gesture startled him more than any words. "You didn't have to," he said. She looked up. "Then who would?" That day, the camp buzzed with talk of her. Men noticed her at the mess line, her quiet movements, her dark hands wrapped in wool. Some were curious, others bold. One or two laughed too loudly. Elias heard them but said nothing. The North had its own rules, the kind that needed no words. At dusk, as he worked the last of the saw teeth with a file, she came to the doorway. "You turn down every woman who speaks to you," she said evenly. "Is that pride or fear?" He looked at her for a long time, the rasp still in his hand. "Neither." "Then what?" He set the file down. "It's knowing what can't be kept." She stepped closer. The firelight caught her eyes, not soft, not pleading, just human. "And if someone doesn't ask to be kept? If she only asks to stay alive?" He didn't answer. The question hung there, sharp as winter air. She smiled faintly then, without warmth, without cruelty. "You want a wife," she said, "or just shelter?" He couldn't speak. Outside, the wind howled against the boards, and somewhere in the distance, a tree fell under its own frozen weight. He stood with the question lodged beneath his ribs. The stove ticked as the iron settled. Her breath was even, not hurried, not afraid. He reached for the saw file again and found his hand steady. The rasp made a dry whisper against the teeth, a sound like winter rain on tin. She watched him work and did not press him. Patience could cut deeper than any blade here. He knew that. He kept the stroke even, measuring each tooth, giving each the same attention he gave to his axe edge. Work had always steadied him. Work was the only answer that never lied. When she turned away, she folded the scrap cloth carefully and looped it over a peg. The motion said she intended to stay. It was not bold. It was simply true. He listened to her step fade across the hard-packed snow outside, the crunch shrinking, absorbed by the quiet that swallowed everything once the men left the cookhouse. He heard a dog shake itself and settle. He heard the river shift beneath its crust, a low groan that moved through the trees like a warning swallowed by distance. He finished the saw and wrapped it in canvas. His hands moved by habit. Oil the teeth, wipe the handle, close the buckle, place it upright behind the bench. He looked down at his palms, at the network of old cuts and the new skin knotted over them. He had kept himself alive with those hands. He had kept himself alone with them too. In the morning, the camp woke hard. The wind had turned in the night and dropped the temperature to a mean cruelty. Breath froze in mustaches, eyes watered and turned raw. The cook rang the bell twice, urgent and tired. Men banged their spoons and laughed like they could convince their bodies they were not suffering. Elias ate quickly and did not taste much. Salt pork. Biscuit turned to paste in his mouth. Coffee boiled black, swallowed hot, no sugar. He stood when he was done and scraped his tin clean with the back of a knife. He found her by the woodpile beside the cookhouse, stacking split rounds with careful economy. Her shawl was wrapped tight, but he could see the shape of muscle along her forearms. She moved like someone who understood that time could be cut into small, useful slices. The cook swore at a kettle and slapped a boy who had dropped a tray. She did not flinch. She placed another round on the pile and straightened without hurrying. "You'll be wasted on firewood," he said quietly. "I warm my own bones first," she answered, not looking at him. "Then we consider the rest." "You talk as if there is more to consider." "There always is," she said, and lifted another piece. A pair of men drifted close, drawn by curiosity and the easy sport of it. One was the Quebecois, Remy, grinning too easily. The other was Larson, thick through the shoulders with a temper that flared when sober and grew dark when drunk. Remy tipped his cap and put on his best version of charm. "Madame," he said, the word dragged long to sound elegant. "You need help with that?" "I need the wood stacked neatly," she said. "If you can manage neat," Remy laughed. "Neat," she says, "like my Sunday cuffs." Larson leaned on the post, his eyes sliding from her hands to her face and back again. "Where you from?" he asked. "Not here," she lifted another round. "Far south." "South is a long measure," Larson said. "What's the name?" "Ndlovu," she answered, and set the wood in place. Larson tasted the name with his mouth and chewed on it like gristle. He looked at Elias. "She with you?" "No," Elias said. "She's with herself." Remy chuckled and elbowed Larson. But the big man's eyes narrowed, a slow tightening of something that had nothing to do with humor. "This is a man's camp," he said. "I don't care what the foreman allows. Things change when women come. Men get foolish." "She came because the world outside is more foolish," Elias replied. "Go work. The trees don't cut themselves." "Don't tell me where to swing," Larson muttered. But he pushed away from the post and left. Remy gave a small shrug and followed. She placed the last piece of wood and dusted her hands. "I will manage," she said softly. He nodded. "I know." By noon the river ice flashed blue and brittle under a hard sun. The teams worked the southern bank, taking down pine too tall to last another season. Elias threw his weight into the swing, kept his feet sure on the crusted snow, and tried not to think. The rhythm helped. He measured the scarf cut with his eye, set the notch where the trunk needed to go, and listened to the tree tell him its story. He always heard it if he was patient. A groan in the grain, a shift in the shoulder, a whisper from deep in the core. This one resisted. It had clung to wind and drought and the weight of its own winter crowns for decades. It did not want to fall for a man. Remy hauled the cross-cut saw into place and grinned around chapped lips. "Bet you a pipeful we put it down before Larson's team finishes theirs." "I don't bet," Elias said. "Because you think you're unlucky?" "Because I've seen what luck costs." They pulled the saw in a long, even breath. Steel sang through sapwood. Snow shivered from the branches above and landed in soft bursts that melted on their necks and then froze again. Remy's smile faded to a thin line. He worked. Elias kept the pace. The tree shuddered, warned them in a deep tone, and Elise said quietly, "Back now." They stepped aside. The giant swayed once as though reconsidering its life, then committed. It fell toward the notch, its top brushing the crowns of its neighbors, releasing a sound like a great book closing on a truth men did not want to read. The trunk slammed down and sent a short quake through Elias's feet. He had always liked that last moment. It reminded him the earth did not belong to men or their plans. They limbed the trunk fast, Clean, leaving the branches in neat piles for later. Remy whistled once at the clean grain. This will pull good money downstream. Elias kept his eyes on the work. Money fits in some pockets and never others. At dusk, they snaked the logs to the river's edge and cribbed them in readiness for the drive. Elias coiled the sled rope in a tight loop and slung it over a peg. His shoulders complained but did not break. He had brought them to the edge before. He would again. Back at camp, the cookhouse roared with talk and smoke. She stood behind the serving line and handed bowls without rushing. She had pulled her shawl off and rolled her sleeves to the elbow. The muscles along her forearm moved like cord under dark skin. Men noticed. Men always noticed strength more than beauty when they were tired and cold. A few kept their voices clean. A few did not. "Evening, miss," Remy said, polite and bright. "Evening," she returned, eyes on the ladle. Larson set his tray down hard. The spoon clattered. "You got a first name?" he asked. She paused one breath and then served him. "Thandi." The sound was soft and clipped, not meant to be offered, but not given reluctantly. Larson tried it out. "Tandy," he said, flattening it. He looked at the meat and then at her face. "Not much pork." "There is enough," she said. "For who?" He opened his mouth again, but the foreman came in then. Wind burned and sour. He clapped his hands once and the room answered. "Hear me, boys," he said. "We've got a weather seam coming. 3 days of clear, then a blow from the north that'll strip the bark off your pride. We finish the river feed by then, or we're swimming under ice to pull your bones from the snags. Keep your tongues in your mouths and your axes sharp." Larson swallowed whatever remark had gathered in his throat and took his tray. He moved down the line muttering. Elias took his bowl and stood near the back wall where the air was less loud. He ate slow. She carried a bucket to the tables, refilling coffee with an easy arm. When she reached him, she tipped the pot without asking. "Thandi," he repeated. He said it carefully, as if it had an edge. She looked at him. "Yes, it means something?" She considered him for a moment and then nodded. "Love." He stared at the steam rising from his cup. He had no reply that did not sound foolish in his own mouth. She left him there with the heat and the word cooling in his hands. That night the wind lay down. Frost settled like glass over the camp. The dogs slept with their noses tucked under their tails and did not twitch. He woke twice, once from the sound of a man coughing blood in the next bunkhouse over, again from a dream of river light under ice. When he finally rose, the world was so still he heard the creak of the pine boards adjusting under his steps. She sat on her bunk mending another glove, the needle flashing quick in the firelight. He nodded. She nodded back. He pulled on his boots and left without words. On the second day, Larson found a reason to stand too close by the sleds. He scraped a hand across the fresh-planed handle of a peavey and admired his own knuckles. "Pretty wood," he said, to no one in particular. "Shame when pretty wood splits." Elias looked at him and then past him. "Take your team to the east stand," he said. "You're behind. Who's counting?" Larson sneered. "I am," the foreman said, riding up. "Trouble with that?" Larson huffed and stamped away. Trouble would come later. Elias knew it. Trouble taken to heart grew like ice in a crack. It had a mind and a patience. He filed the thought away and returned to the line. They dropped 6 trees in the afternoon and dragged them with stubborn mules down to the river. A skiff of new snow fell and blew sideways. Elias squinted into it and kept his step measured. Remy joked less now and grunted more. Men became animals of task when the cold made every breath a negotiation. They did not waste much on words. At the bank, a knot of men argued over the new crib stack. The river had shifted under the night. An invisible current had gnawed at the base and left the top sound. Elias saw it from 10 paces. He lifted his hand once, a small motion. "Not there," he said. "Move it 3 feet up. You want a clean release when the drive starts." 3 feet up, a man repeated, doubtful. "You want the whole lot to plunge and roll?" Elias asked. "Move it." They moved it. The crib settled with a sensible thud. The river sighed beneath the ice and let it stand. Elias felt a short satisfaction bloom and then drift away. He did not keep those feelings long. They softened a man at the wrong time. On the way back, he found her near the tool shed with a basket of stitched trousers. She looked up at his face and read something there. "You have a problem," she said quietly. "I have a job," he answered. Same answer, different words. He held her gaze and then nodded. "Larson will not let me ignore him. He will make a mistake when cold or liquor bites," she said. "He will look to you to answer it. And if I don't, he will take that as an answer too. He let the basket handle turn once under his fingers. It creaked. "You learn men quickly." "I learned them before the snow," she said. Here the learning is sharper. That evening, the foreman set her at the laundry troughs with 2 other women from downstream cabins. The river water steamed where it met the air. Her hands worked strong under numbness. The other women talked about children and men who returned once a month with coin and excuses. She listened and said little. Elias saw her more often now in the corner of his sight than in front of him. The knowledge changed the quiet inside his shed. It felt less like emptiness and more like some useful space between walls. After supper, Larson planted himself by the stove and spoke loud enough for every corner to hear. The words were not clever. He used small ones that left stains. Men laughed in the nervous way they did when heat and danger stood too close. Remy kept his eyes on his tin and chewed like a man trying to make food be more than it was. Elias stood and faced the foreman. "Leave him to me," he said under his breath. The foreman's jaw worked. "I'd rather leave him to the ice," he grunted. "But fine. Keep it clean." Elias crossed the room and stopped 2 paces short. Larson looked up, eyes gleaming with the contentment of a man who had found the thing he wanted most. "You finally hear me?" he asked. "Good. I was starting to think the cold had turned your ears to wood." Elias spoke low. "You will stop talking about her." "Which her?" Larson asked, smirking. "The camp has a few. You know which." Larson's smile cracked a little. "You set rules now?" "I set this one," Elias said. "You will stop." Larson rose. He was taller by 3 inches and heavier by 40 pounds. He smelled of sweat, smoke, and something ranker from the bottle. "Or what?" Elias did not look at his hands. He did not look at Larson's eyes. He looked at the other man's belt buckle. He had learned to look there years ago. Eyes lied, hands moved. Belts carried truth in the way they stood or shifted. He said, "Or you and I'll take a walk." The bunkhouse quieted in a ring around them. Someone sucked in a breath. The stove popped and threw a coal onto the floor. The cook stomped it with his heel without looking away from the men. Larson spat into a corner and grinned again. "A walk sounds pleasant." They went out into the cold, where the river carried millions of small sounds under the ice. Elias took them away from the lamps, past the tool shed, into the thin birch that stood like bones at the camp's edge. He stopped where the snow lay untouched, and the sound carried quick. "No knives," he said. "No peavies, hands." Larson cracked his knuckles and laughed softly. "Hands then." Elias lifted his palms. He had no poetry to give that moment. He had only his body, trained by work that punished sloppy thought. Larson came in hard, swinging heavy as if a man were a tree. Elias stepped left and let the first rush slip past. He felt the wind of it against his cheek. He did not swing back. He waited. The second rush came wilder, fueled by the need to make a mark. Elias ducked under and drove his shoulder into Larson's belly, low and mean. Breath burst from the bigger man and turned to ice between them. Elias followed with 2 quick fists to the ribs, not for anger but for effect. He stepped back, empty-handed, and watched Larson weigh his own pain. "You old fool!" Larson gasped. He charged again, and this time caught Elias's jaw with a glancing strip of knuckles. Pain flashed bright and honest. Elias tasted copper. He did not stagger. He stepped into Larson instead of away and turned his hips like he was moving a log into a notch. His fist landed on the hinge of Larson's jaw. The bigger man folded, not gracefully, and hit the snow with a sound like a felled deer. They stood there with their steam rising around them, like the ghosts men loved to name when drink ran them to nonsense. Elias waited. He would not hit a man on the ground, not ever. Larson rolled, spat blood, and used his knee to climb upright. He stared at Elias, breathing like a broken bellows. Something in his eyes had changed. It was not respect. It was not hate either. It was the comprehension that the world lined up around some men in ways you could not bend. "Done," Larson said. The word a rock. "Done," Elias agreed. They walked back toward the light in the silence men used when pride split but did not shatter. The ring of bodies opened and swallowed them. The foreman looked once at Elias's split lip and once at Larson's swelling jaw. He nodded to no one and returned to his stew. Conversation returned in a relieved wash. She waited outside the cookhouse, under the eave where the drip from the thaw had refrozen into an iron fringe. Her shawl was pulled tight. She looked at his face and tilted her head. "You did not want to fight," she said. "I wanted the talking stopped," he replied. "And you chose winter to do it. The season's honest," he said. "It keeps men from dragging things longer than they should." She looked past him at the river and then back. You were measured. I have been measuring things my whole life, he said. She breathed once, the white cloud shaping, then disappearing. You think that will help you answer me? He felt the question again in his ribs, a little deeper now. I don't know. Good, she said. A man who knows everything is too blind to feed himself. The next morning came with a blue cold, so sharp men swore before they fully woke. The foreman drove them hard, because the clear window would break soon. They worked into each other like fingers interlaced. Logs moved, ropes slapped, mules balked, and then obeyed. Elias kept his count. He watched feet and hands and ice edges. He held his breath at the right times and let it out when the weight eased past the point of taking a man with it. He forgot his jaw a little until he smiled at something Remy said and felt the split tug. That was good. Pain reminded him that he still had edges. At midday, a sled team from the south camp slid into view, pulled by a big grey horse and a little black one that looked like it had learned stubbornness as a creed. The driver lifted a hand and shouted news that travelled in pieces between gusts. There had been an accident on a crossing. A young boy in the cookhouse yard had fallen into a hidden pocket under the bank. The ice had been thin there where the slop emptied. He had gone down and been pulled back with a rope, but not before he swallowed half the river. He breathed now, but ragged. They needed rags, hot water, strong arms to move him without breaking something else. She left her laundry and went without waiting for instruction. Elias saw her shawl vanish between trees. He took the foreman's nod as license and followed. They reached the south camp yard, where a half-circle of men stood around a small shape laid on boards. A woman knelt with her hair loose and her mouth open in a noise no one wanted to name. The small chest rose and fell, a flutter under a soaked shirt. She pressed her hands to the ribs and said the boy's name over and over like a prayer that could be true if it stayed spoken long enough. Boil that, someone shouted. Hold him up. Not too much. He needs breath. She pushed through with her sleeves already rolled and knelt by the boy. Hush, she said to the mother, her voice clean and low. Hush now. We will keep him. She slid her hands under the boy's shoulders and lifted just enough to free his lungs. She pressed her ear to his mouth and listened. She wiped his lips with quick fingers. Fire, she said. Not heat. Fire in his chest. They looked at her like she was speaking code. She tapped the boy's sternum with the heel of her hand. Once, twice. His chest spasmed and spit river back out onto the boards. She turned his head and cleared his mouth with 2 fingers. The boy gasped and then fell back into a thin rattle. She did not flinch. She pulled him into her lap and held him upright against her belly. Breathe, she whispered in his ear. Breathe, small one. Her breath mixed with his in a cloud that shook. Elias moved without thinking. He fetched blankets from a sled and warmed them near the stove mouth. He handed them to her, and she wrapped the boy, tight enough to trap whatever life had decided to return. The mother rocked and keened and then bit her knuckles because the sound was scaring the child. The foreman swore softly with his eyes wet from more than wind. Water, the cook said, returning with a steaming bucket. What now? Not in his mouth, she said. On the cloth. She dipped a rag and wrung it and laid it on the boy's chest. Steam rose and turned to frost on his hair. He coughed. He coughed again and brought up something that smelled of rot. He drew in a breath that had weight to it. The mother collapsed onto her elbows and cried like a broken thing. She reached for her boy and then snatched her hands back, afraid to take him away from whatever kept him alive. The woman with the shawl nodded and took the mother's hands and placed them around the boy. Hold him, she said. Tell him he is heavy. Tell him he must stay. Stay, the mother sobbed. Stay, Candle, stay. The boy's eyes fluttered and then opened. They were the pale blue of a February sky. He tried to speak but made only a small sound. The sound was enough. The men around them sighed and looked away, embarrassed by the sudden looseness in their faces. Elias stood with his hands dead at his sides and watched the woman work. She did not glance up at him. She did not seem to care whether men saw her or judged her or counted her among the worthy. She simply stood in the space between Winter and a child and stitched a seam there with her hands. He felt something in his chest loosen and then settle. He had no name for it that did not feel dangerous. On the walk back, Remy kicked at snow and shook his head. She saved him, he said, with her hands. Like a... Don't, Elias warned. The word sharp. All right, Remy muttered. All right. A woman like that makes a man feel small. She makes a man feel honest, Elias said. Remy glanced sideways. Same thing sometimes. The north wind came that evening like a judge. It flattened the camp's laughter and turned it into teeth-clenched sounds men made in their throats. The foreman cancelled the night tasks and sent everyone to their bunks, with orders to bank fires and keep tools inboard. The storm would take what men forgot. It always did. Elias hung his axes and checked the window latches twice. He set a pot of snow on the stove to melt and laid out an extra blanket. She stood at the door with her shawl pulled close, hair damp from where the river air had found it. "You should sleep," he said. "I will," she answered. She stepped inside and closed the door against the knife outside. "You bleed a little," she added, pointing to his split lip. "I had forgotten," he said. She moved near, tipped his chin with 2 fingers, and looked at the cut. "He was heavy," she said. "He was angry. Same thing sometimes." She smiled once, tired but real. "You are stubborn." "I have learned I am not easily moved," he said. "Then I will ask again," she said. And the words fell into the room like logs settling in a fire. "You want a wife or just shelter?" He watched her hand fall back to her side. He listened to the stove gasp as it drew more air for the heat. His answer had to be something that did not hide behind what he was. He had turned down women because they wanted a door to a room he had never built. He had given shelter because shelter did not ask for a name. The truth sat bitter on his tongue. He said, "I want someone alive beside me." "I do not know if that is the same as a wife." She nodded, as if she had expected that shape. "Alive is a beginning," she said. "A wife is a work." "A work," he repeated. "Like a long winter," she added. "You live through pieces of it. You do not win. You endure with purpose." He looked at her hand, at the scar that crossed the knuckle and disappeared under the sleeve. "And what do you want?" She did not answer at once. She stepped to the stove and lifted the lid with the hem of a cloth. Steam rose and softened her face. "I want to be somewhere my name does not get lost," she said. "I want to stack wood and see the stack grow and feel that I am not stacking for someone who will burn it and forget who cut it. I want my breath to matter to someone who does not turn away." He felt the words like warm water on cold stone. "That sounds like something a man would say." "It is something a person says," she answered. The wind found the eaves and pulled at them with careful fingers. The door rattled once and settled. He pulled the latch tight and turned back. She had spread a blanket on her bunk and set her shawl folded neat under her head. She lay down like someone who had learned to sleep wherever sleep could be found. He banked the fire and lay on his cot with his boots on the floor, laces loose. He lay in the dark with her breath near. He did not close his eyes for a long while. Sometime in the blackest part of the night, the door banged and flew open half a handspan, then slammed back against the latch. Cold knifed the room. He rose, crossed the floor, and pushed it shut with his shoulder. He felt the wind pushing back, a body against his. He shoved the bolt, wedged a wedge under the jamb, and waited until the pressure eased. When he turned, she was sitting up, the blanket around her shoulders. "Storm's bad," he said. "Yes," she answered. "It wants to see who gives first." He returned to his cot and sat with his elbows on his knees. "I've given to storms before," he said. "You still have your house," she replied. "You did not give everything." Morning came slow and mean. The wind no longer screamed, it spoke. It shaped the drifts into decisions. Men stumbled out and leaned into the spaces between buildings like soldiers working through a city under fire. Axes stayed put. Ropes stayed in. The day's work would be simple. Keep the roofs from caving. Keep the fires from dying. Keep the men from turning their misery into wounds. Elias climbed to his shed roof and drove the snow off with a push broom tied to a pole. His arms burned with the effort. Twice he slipped and caught himself on the edge, fingers declining to feel until pain flooded them back to duty. He saw Remy waving from the bunkhouse halfway through and nodded. The boy's face was red and pleased. Keeping roofs alive was a hero's chore during a blow. By midday, the storm slackened to a steady howl. Elias went to check the river edge with a rope around his waist and sense in his bones. The ice had buckled near the chute. He peered down at a crack that breathed warm mist into the air and smelled like something old scraping through new skin. He backed away slow. The river would ask for its debt when they started the drive. He could feel it. He returned to the shed and found her bent over the small table, a sheet of paper held flat with a tin heater. The paper was thick and stained at one corner. Her face had softened into a shape he had not seen yet. He closed the door carefully. "You write?" he asked. "I remember," she said, not looking up. "What is it?" "A list," she said. "Things I have and things I do not." He waited. She put the paper down and smoothed it once with the back of her hand. "Do you wish to read it?" she asked. "No," he said. "It's yours." She nodded. folded the paper twice, and tucked it inside her trunk. "You are a careful man, Elias Hart," she said. "Careful men build strong houses. They also keep long silences." "Silence helps a man hear the right danger," he said. "And the right mercy," she replied, eyes bright, sharp. He went to the bench and started cleaning the smaller axe. He wiped resin from the edge with turpentine and a rag, rubbed oil into the handle to keep the grain from cracking. He did what he always did when he needed to remember who he was. The motions held him. They did not close him. That was new. Toward dusk, the wind fell away. The camp rose up like a creature after a beating and shook itself. Men cursed with relief. Someone began a hymn and then laughed at his own voice. The sky cleared to a hard iron. Stars bit through like nails. The foreman called a meeting by the cookhouse door and spoke plain. "We go hard tomorrow," he said. "Ice will shift. Cribs may go early. Keep your heads in your lines. If you see a man go under, shout first and tie second. The river takes what fools give. It does not need a second gift." Elias went to bed early and did not sleep. His body had learned the trick of resting while watched by its own nerves. He lay there and thought about her question. He turned it like a log to see all the faces of its grain. He tried to picture her beside him years from now. He saw her hands, the scar cross-hatched over the knuckle. He saw her lips shape the word stay. He did not see a church or a paper. He did not see rings. He saw shelter built by two sets of hands. He saw winter and the splitting, the stacking, the small fire that didn't go out because someone always remembered to feed it. When dawn came, it came on the edge of iron. Men rose and strapped knives to belts and wrapped scarves until only eyes showed. The river waited, flat as a slate with black writing under it. Elias took his place near the first crib with 3 men he trusted and 2 he watched. Remy stood on his left with a peavey like another arm. Larson posted on the far side, face set in a shape beyond yesterday's fight. They started the release. Stakes came out, ropes slipped. The ice spoke its piece and broke in patient slabs. The first logs rolled with a sigh and then a rush. Everything moved at once within the measured sequence men had prepared. Elias barked a warning and threw his weight onto a line when a snag threatened to take 3 men and a mule into the chute. The line snapped his body half off his feet. He dug heels into snow and held until the angle changed and the weight let go. He felt a small tearing in his shoulder and accepted it. The work asked for blood and took it with the same indifference it gave pay. Then a shout went up that split the morning. Not the useful bark of a warning, not the low call of a command. A shout that belonged to fear. Elias turned and saw a man grab at ice that broke into dinner plates under his hands. He went down because the river had chosen his spot 9 days ago, when a tree bit there and nobody marked it right. He went down and did not come up where he should have. Men ran circles on the bank, because men did that when water moved under them and minds forgot how to count. Elias felt the world narrow to details. He saw the rope spooled wrong near the sled and sprinted toward it. He threw the coil and saw the loop land too short. He pulled and threw again. The second throw arced true. The man's hand rose once and touched the rope but did not close. Elias cursed the cold that stiffened every useful joint. He sprinted along the bank and timed the current's speed with his eyes. He could not see the man. He saw bubbles under ice. He swung the peavey and punched its tip through the skin and pulled the hole wide. He slid flat on his stomach and shoved the hook under. Blind, feeling for weight. He felt cloth. He felt the warmth of a living thing moving wrong. He drove the hook into the fabric and leaned back with everything his back had left. Hands closed on his boots. Remy, Larson, others. He did not look. They pulled and the river pulled harder the other way. Something tore inside Elias's shoulder with a white-hot, tidy motion. He welcomed the pain because it meant they still had purchase. The man came up like a newborn dragged from darkness. He gasped and didn't. Elias pulled until sound burst from the man's chest and turned into a cough. They rolled back and lay panting as the river swept past, uninterested in the drama it had caused. The rescued man sobbed and curled like a child. He was not a large man. He had the face of someone who had never quite believed the world could be cruel to him. Elias sat up, swayed once, and ground his teeth against the shoulder's fire. He looked around and saw her. She stood 3 paces back, her hands holding a blanket, her mouth tight. She moved in and wrapped the man with a swiftness that kept heat in. She touched his face. She spoke to him. The river kept speaking too. Elias could not hear either as words. He heard the tones. One told him to stand if he could. The other told the rescued man that his name would be heard tonight. Elias stood. He swayed. He did not fall. He turned to walk back to the crib and felt her hand on his arm. You will not lift with that shoulder, she said. I will lift, he answered. You will lift the end of a sentence, she said. Not a log. He stared at her and then nodded once. Then I will call the count. You will call it clean, she said. He did. He stood on the bank with his jaw set and his arm quiet, and counted the timber through the chute. The men glanced at him and took comfort where they could find it. In late afternoon, the foreman called it enough for a day that had asked for a life and taken only flesh. They would live with that and count themselves ahead. Back in camp, the quiet was the warm quiet. Men spoke low and chewed slow. They looked at the man who had come out of the river like he belonged and was not to be mocked for the fear that had run out his nose. He ate with shaking hands and did not meet anyone's eye. Elias sat on the edge of a bench and pulled at his shoulder with careful fingers. She came to him with a strip of cloth and a pot of something that smelled sharp and clean. Hold still, she said. He did. She slid his shirt off his shoulder and he felt the room suck in around them. Men did not know where to look. She ignored them. She rubbed the medicine in with strong fingers and his skin went from on fire to something he could name. You will sleep with your arm against the wall, she said. Do not chase dreams with it. Thank you, he said. She tied the cloth and knotted it true. You will answer me soon, she said, not unkindly, before winter finishes with either of us. He watched her walk away with the empty pot. He saw Larson watching him and then looking away like a man who had accepted the shape of something he could not change. He saw Remy toasting himself with tea as if it were the finest brandy in Montreal. He saw the foreman's mouth twitch like a man who smiled when it hurt. He saw the door open and close under the weight of the wind and thought about a house that did not bleed when the world pushed it. That night, the camp slept like men who had struck a bargain with nature and bought one more day. He lay with his arm against the wall, the cloth holding quiet. He listened to the stove breathe. She lay across from him with her hair undone. The lines of her face softened under warmth. He felt a decision coming toward him the way men feel a storm or a thaw before the sky changes. He did not fear it like he might have once. Near midnight, he spoke into the dark where his voice would find only wood and her breathing. I have turned down women because they asked for something I did not know how to give, he said. I have given shelter because it cost me less than telling the truth. I do not want to turn you down, Thandin Lovu. I do not want to give you shelter either. I want to try to keep a fire with you that does not die when my back is turned. She was quiet a long time. The stove popped and settled. The wind pressed a palm to the window and then let it go. She said, Then we will try. We will try in the language of work. He closed his eyes and saw the river. He opened them and saw the small red eye of the stove. He stayed like that until the night let go of his chest and sleep took his bones in two careful hands. If you enjoyed, please subscribe and comment what country you're watching from. See you in the next one.